here's a big update. Kevin Smith has revealed what's been ailing him, what's been troubling him. He released it as a 35-minute video through people.com, People Magazine. And it's not anything that we predicted. So we were like, okay. So to recap for people, we knew that he had quit weed. We knew that he felt like he was numb to the world and like he wanted to become like his authentic self again. But it seemed like something catastrophic happened either with personal relationship. And I suppose it's possible. He made a lot of references before we saw the new video to like I'm really sorry for the people I've hurt. They must want me dead. He was making comments like that. And so we were like, maybe like his wife left him or something. It sounds like he's been living in New Jersey, maybe spending all of his time at his movie theater. Well, yeah, it's not what I expected. So he tells his story in this order. He says, when I was 6, I was sexually abused in the form of an older kid made me perform a sex act on another 6-year-old. And she and I remember it, and I've never seen that kid again. And that was like traumatizing. And then I had 2 other traumatic experiences. One was I was in a classroom saying the Pledge of Allegiance when I was 9, and the teacher said like, "Ew, Mr. Smith, like the gut on you," or something like, something very like hurtful about his looks. And then the third time was he was going down a water slide when he was 9, and like a teen was like, hey, no pregnant ladies can go down the slide. And so those were like times where he felt humiliated or controlled or exploited. And he feels that colored all of his experiences from that point forward. It's what traumatized him into developing unhealthy habits and an unhealthy like self-perception. Now, when you come out with like, hey, I had a mental break, everybody, that's what he did. He had a mental break. I'll talk about that more in a second. And then you say, and here's what I found. I was sexually abused. The way I first thought of it was like, oh, is this a repressed memory or something? And he like through therapy, he found out about it and that's what's going on. No, it's more like, because I actually have heard him tell all of those stories before throughout his whole career. It's more like he's now discovering how much they hurt him and how that hurt dictated his behavior from that point forward. So the behavior, I think now would be a good time to jump forward in time and talk about the actual event that happened. And then I think all of this trauma talk is him trying to make sense of the mental break. I think the jury's out. I mean, I think there's no way to know, like, are those the experiences that caused it or what?
I would never assume anybody's... I don't want to, like, dictate, like, hey, no.
Yeah.
You suck it up.
And so that's what the video is about. The video is called Trauma is Trauma. He had I think what they call a dissociative episode where somewhat all of a sudden he felt a break with reality. Now, I've never had anything like this before, so I don't quite understand it. I just have to kind of take I have to try to understand it through the way he describes it. But it's something like he felt as though he was not himself. And I don't mean, I don't feel like myself. I mean like a break with his identity, where the reality that he was living was suddenly discovered to be a complete fraud. And he was, it sounded like he was suicidal, at least for a period. He went nuts. It's the way he describes it. So much so that he checked into a clinic in Tucson, Arizona. So something, yeah. And so I asked, Nina knows a thing or two about this. And so I was like, what was this like psych episode? And she was like, well, it could have been that he had a lot of disorganized thoughts, disorganized behaviors, not making sense to people. Like suddenly, being like way too humorful, suddenly being extremely depressed. She's like, it could have been, it's normally the form that it comes in. And she floated the idea of, she was like, it could also, like that's a lot of weed he was smoking. And they're like, you can have like, it's perfectly common to have psychotic episodes. She was like, what was it? Substance induced psychosis is what it's called. And she was like, it's extremely common with teens. Like, it's the number one cause of it.
Frankie. weed is completely harmless.
Oh boy! Remember we laughed last time about like don't go after their weed, and sure enough, like it's always interesting whenever you say anything divisive or controversial. Whenever we do, I'm always like, well, because sometimes it's great. Sometimes there's like it turns out that you've invited a bunch of people who don't normally talk about things to talk about them, and you kind of like find your people a little bit more. And other times it's like, how do I make a video that for the next 48 hours, I'll just be fielding comments that make no effort to understand what I was trying to say, or are deeply offended by like a different perspective on something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But look, he said it himself. He was smoking every minute of every day. I mean, this is not, if you're out there smoking weed, I bet you're not smoking as much as Kevin Smith was based on what he was saying.
If I were to guess that would be the cause of it.
Now, the weed habit, I believe, came out of trying to silence self-loathing thoughts.
Yeah.
And the self-loathing thoughts, and also the anxiety and all the rest of it. This is kind of like dysfunctional personality that he had.
There was a huge life change that I made. At age 38, I became a stoner. So suddenly I had myself a little vice, and one that made me feel good, and it made me toss away my cigarettes too, because I started smoking so much weed, I just quit the regular cigarettes. So I'd kind of gotten into it, and I was like, I like this. I like who I am when I'm on weed and shit. And I said, I'm 38, I'm an adult, I can make this choice. I've built a fucking empire, now I just want to smoke it away, you know? Like,
because I think most people are living some degree of what he's describing. So what he describes is these things, whether it's those 3 events or other things like them or whatever, led to him having an unhealthy self-image, but also trying to minimize the harm that they caused him. So it causes him all kinds of harm, and then he's like, what can I do to make this small? What can I do to make this kind of like packaged away? And so for him, it was self-deprecating humor. It was being on all the time. It was being a big personality. It was accolades. It was achieving about, so he kind of answered it with becoming a high achiever from his perspective. Mm-hmm. And he describes that as becoming the other guy. That's how so he's like, this Carnival Barker personality that I have, that's the other guy. That's me embodying somebody I wish I was, somebody who I feel better when I'm acting like, somebody who gets pats on the back. And he's like, and I really believe that Clerks was made by the authentic me, and that a lot of what I did after Clerks was feeding the ego of this other guy, or letting this other guy take the wheel.
That's interesting.
And that the mental break was him suddenly realizing that he has not embodied his authentic self in a very long time, in a frighteningly long time.
I told him, I was like, hey man, I see myself as a performative version of myself. I call him the other guy. And, I looked in the other day and I wasn't there anymore. So when I walked into Sierra Tucson, I was convinced that I'd stopped existing. That was my break with reality.
Yeah, and we all put on masks whenever we're, interacting with other people. And it's like, what is your true self, and what is it an amalgamation of these personalities that you put on? Yeah, so I don't know. It's, if that's his way to cope through what he's going through, that's cool.
Well, so he smoked weed to make the kind of the anxiety of it all go away, and then he increased it. And I personally believe maybe then had a psychotic episode as an amalgamation of the unhealthy behaviors, the amount of substance he was taking in, who knows. But so he goes to this facility, and that's when he learned this meditative self-therapy stuff, this living in the present stuff. It's when his therapist told him, like, these events that you're talking about are actually abuse, and they're actually trauma, and just because you weren't a World War II vet doesn't mean that your amygdala didn't process the information as trauma. And I think that's a pretty important thing to talk about, because, like, we have children. Mm-hmm. I think you understand just how sensitive their brain development is. Like certainly something traumatic can happen to you later in life that affects you a lot. But at least when that happens, you've already mapped the world. You have like a fair in fact, it takes like earth-shattering stuff to traumatize you because you've already mapped the world. You already have a solid understanding of what's good, what's bad, what works, what doesn't work, what's fair, what's unfair, what's true, what's not true. And when you're a child, you're really just taking everything as truth for a while.
Just taking everything in. Yeah.
So yeah, if you're 9 and somebody says ew, like gross, like, yeah, I mean that of course that can stick with you. And now that he says it, I'm like, so many of his self-deprecating jokes were phrased in the form of like, ew, you fat fuck, you know?
Yeah.
They were through that like disgust thing, that
Right.
loathsome thing. He also said, you know, I think this might be like something I've noticed about Kevin is that he'll connect dots that I don't like, who can say whether or not those two dots connect, but he'll do it with things like, he'll be like, without this person, there'd be no clerks. Without this set of conditions, there'd be no clerks. And with it, like, he'll draw crazy diagrams.
Like the yarn on the wall.
Yeah, he's Charlie Day. But he was like, and maybe that's why I became a director, you know, after the sexual abuse, because I don't want someone directing me anymore. I'll direct somebody else. And I was like,
Guess what that little kid grew up to be? A director. Because nobody's ever going to do that to me again. I'm going to be in charge for the rest of my life. Nobody's ever going to tell me to do something I don't want to do.
he's probably just trying to make sense of things. And so, or yeah, like one of his books was called like a story about a fat kid who did good. Yeah, he definitely had a self-esteem problem. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. He says he thought during his mental break that the other guy killed his authentic self, himself, which is, you know, that's crazy stuff.
Yeah, that's good.
And then in the facility, he felt like the other guy wasn't allowed in because there was no opportunity to sell t-shirts. There was no opportunity to tweet about this. There was no opportunity to in any way incorporate his business and his media savvy into what he was working on.
Well, that totally makes sense. And I think, like, I do think meditation and prayer is important. And even, like, people take media fasts sometimes.
Yeah.
Even if you're secular, they'll, like, take, Saturday off from even looking at your phone. And I think that's healthy. It's healthy to, be with yourself for a bit.
I'm dealing with it with my kid right now. She was having it started with, she was struggling with, like just getting tasks at school done in a timely way. Like everything, she seemed to understand the math, seems to understand the reading, but like she would take an extra 10 minutes. And Nina was like, let's start not doing any, like we would watch Bluey in the morning. And she was like, let's not do TV in the mornings anymore. And I was like, do you really think that like no TV is going to relate to like better attention span like 5 hours later? And it seems to have. I mean, either that or she's just growing out of it. But the theory is that this idea that like every time you're bored, you can pick up the phone, you can pick up the TV, you can be mediated, you can be immediately entertained. It's a problem. It's a problem I have for sure. Like where I can't like, I'll end up breaking down this podcast later and I will put on some kind of media. Well, I won't just like putter around quietly and do it, like.
It's true. I am awful with that, obviously, famously with dishes, but washing dishes, I put on something, but every chore, everything I was mowing the lawn today and I was like pissed off that the lawnmower was louder than my headphones. So I couldn't listen to anything. But then it was kind of nice because I was just like, oh, you know what? Maybe it's just time to take in my thoughts for a bit.
And this is beyond that for Kevin, because this is also like, how can I turn every genuine experience into something that's consumable entertainment by somebody else? Does it sound familiar?
Sounds like, yeah. It's like I just bought my wife a bread maker. I'm like, how can I turn this into content?
And he even said, he was like, at my movie, so he started attending, like we talked about last time, Codependence Anonymous, CODA. So it's like an AA program for codependency. And so at the time we didn't know. We were like, who's he codependent on? An individual or, well, apparently he's codependent on external validation. He needs somebody to tell him he's good all the time.
Good point.
And also he became very much addicted to like, like it's a people pleasing thing. He wants to entertain. He wants to be very available to people so that they'll think well of him. And And so he said that was part of the problem too, was he ended up overextending himself and over he would like commit to a trillion things and be bad about following through with them. So what else? Yeah. So he started going to these CODA things, and then he got the idea of I can hold meetings at my movie theater. And then he actually had to like pull back. So I think he's doing it, but he was like, it's got to be totally anonymous. I can't be charging for it. It can't be Kevin Smith's CODA.
Get my, come to my meeting. You can get a t-shirt.
Yeah. Jay and Silent Bob's codependency. And he was talking to his buddy, Scott Mosier, who produced all of his early films and now is like working with Illumination on stuff. He directed the Grinch movie.
Right.
Very, very interesting change. And I think he's a really funny and talented guy. Like if you ever listen to old Smodcasts, he's very entertaining on that. And I think like the Grinch movie has like a really cool wit to it that clearly came from him. Anyway, but he's like a secular meditation guy. He's like a Sam Harris, if you will. Mm-hmm. And, like spiritual, but not religious. And so he was asking Kevin, he said, what would you do? And I guess they ended up talking about this a lot at therapy. What would you do if you couldn't, if you had every opportunity in the world, if there were no limits, what would you do? What would you spend your time on? And then he started talking about like movies or media, and they were like, that's not your job. That's not media related. And he was really struggling to come up with stuff. Like he didn't have like a place he wanted to travel or there was nothing kind of like inner fulfilling that he could think of, which is worth a thought or two. I mean, I don't know is it unhealthy if all of your passions are funneled through a single place? Probably.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. All my passions are funneled through the same place.
Yeah. I mean, I got my family. I got my creative stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Family, obviously. And then the creative endeavors, which is my job. And then it's also my recreation.
Yeah.
But then, I do gaming too, which I try not to make content all the time.
I find it hard. It's like, I'll be like, you know what I should do tonight? Even though it's going to delay things, I'm going to play a fucking video game. And I don't do it. I'm like, yeah, but think about how much better you'll feel if this thing is off your plate.
Yeah.
And that always wins.
Yeah, that's definitely a struggle.
So, he talked a lot about trauma being trauma, the amygdala. He was self-conscious about this. He made repeated reference to like, I know I'm going to get trolled, or I know I'm going to be whatever. One thing I thought was, I was like, is Randall going to have a psychotic break now?
And did Clerks 4. Randall smoked too much weed, had a mental break.
Is that what's going to happen here? But the drugs thing, I just got to return to it just for another moment. I mean, like the conclusion he came to was, drugs are a temporary solution. They're an incomplete solution to a bigger, deeper problem. And good on him. I'm super, super happy he discovered that. I'm really happy that he's messaging it, because it's an unpopular message, frankly. But I'm like, didn't we all learn at age like 5? That, like one of the messages that they send out there into the world. I know people hate DARE and they think it's overblown. It conflates weed with coke and whatever else. I get it. I agree. But I think one of the central messages of all that drug education was drugs are not the solution to your problems. That was what I heard.
You would know. I'm so amazed that you have a video of yourself at some sort of DARE graduation or something.
Yeah, they picked me. Like, here's a guy.
This guy is so anti-weedy.
The message seems to be, don't take drugs, but young people need to know why.
This guy is such a narc.
He's such a narc. He's gonna come speak at the DARE celebration or whatever.
Yeah, no, there was some kind of like a speech contest, and I won it. They were like, all right, you represent, and there was one from each class, and the rest of them were all girls. I was the only boy. Very emasculating.
The only male narc.
Hey, ladies. I don't like weed either.
I'll never touch it.
Oh, did you know it's a gateway drug? I think a missing piece of the story is whatever happened with these Tell 'em Steve Dave guys, because something happened with them, and I don't think that they're reconciled. I see a lot of Tell 'em Steve Dave fans who are like, I demand that Kevin apologize. And I would say, like, not knowing anything about the details at this point, it seems to me like he's being very vulnerable. He's talking very openly about his problems. Hopefully these guys can all connect on whatever fell apart there. Yeah, he's sick. He's mentally, he's definitely got a major issue. And stack that on top of the fact that he almost died 5 years ago of a heart attack.
Right. Which,
Yeah.
he had to make a movie to cope with that. So,
and I in the scheme of things, like he's a very gentle, I think, caring, sensitive person. Like you watch the video, I think anybody with a heart would be like, I'm glad he's working on this.
In the, parlance of our times, I went crazy. I lost my marbles.
One of the things that he said really helped him was this therapy called EMDR. Now, that's not a drug.
There's a process that I did a few times called EMDR. And 52-year-old me was in the room with 9-year-old me and his classmates and my teacher. I was like, this kid's not ready for that. Like, this kid has no coping mechanisms whatsoever. And so this comment is going to shape the rest of his life.
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So the concept is you're going through some kind of like recollection therapy related to like eye movement or something. And the idea, and it seems like a good idea, is to take whatever it is, whatever traumatic memory that your brain is fixated on that's causing you to repeat cycles of bad behavior and to continuously feel PTSD, and turn them into like distant memories. Like, oh yeah, I remember that. It doesn't hurt me now. And you do it through, whatever the physicality. Forgive me for anybody who knows more about it, but it seems like it's related to the physicality that they put you through. And also like, you relive the experience and you talk your way through every second of it and like try to understand it. And, cause you can think of like really bad memories probably in your life, like things that could have really fucked you up, but they didn't. Yeah. For some reason, you're just like, oh yeah, that's, when I think about that, I cringe a bit, and that's kind of it. And I move on from it. Versus things that like, ooh, that like cut me so deep that I moved forward with that scar,
Yeah. It's like giving yourself trigger warnings so that you can it won't trigger you. It's like you have to relive it to actually lessen that trigger.
Yeah. It's something like that. It's like other forms are like journaling where you're going over the thing again. So you're making the thing you're not avoiding and minimizing the thing in this kind of unhealthy way where you're like, oh, I'll just smoke weed and I'll feel better,
So it's not like I'm quitting Twitter or something like that, but don't look for me online, kids, because I'm going to be looking for happiness.
You won't see him as often. That's his promise.
I think that's good for everybody.
Yeah, probably.
I think it's good for everybody. Yeah, it's no good on there. Especially, it'll just work you up.
Yeah, I've been accused once or twice of caring too much about what other people say about me on the internet. And I think that this is half true. And I think it's half false. There's the very occasional one that like hits upon something about my looks or about my this or my that makes me feel like, oh, like I thought I was the only one noticing that. Other people are noticing it, and like it'll affect your self-esteem. But those are rare. Those are like in the 3% range or something like that. It's more like there's like 3 other categories of negative comment that I engage with, which makes it seem like I'm very like concerned about them. But it's more like, there's some that are like they raise a good point, but they do it in such an inflammatory way that they kind of like spark my competitiveness.
Yeah, it's just you gotta temper their beliefs, man. You gotta you gotta make them defend what they're saying, because a lot of people spit a bunch of shit.
So there's being angry when groups of people deliberately mischaracterize you or speculate incorrectly about you, right? So there's correcting the record. There's that. Right. There's like, don't say, especially if it's happening in groups. Like if it happens isolated, whatever, that's fine. One-offs, you never really talk about that. You expect that from the chaos of the internet.
And it helps you if you respond to comments. You're trying to make an argument for your position, and I think that only strengthens, what you're trying to get at.
Yeah.
Just people used to argue all the time. People used to have big debates.
Yeah.
Now we just have a bunch of stupid debates.
Yeah.
Debates.
There's like annoying, competitive, hurtful. And I would say hurtful tends to be like in the vast minority.
Yeah. And usually, it's just stuff that's like, oh, yeah, that doesn't even resemble reality, so it's easy to discount.
Right. If it does, that's the thing about like a hurtful comment is it has to ring a little bit true with you. That is the secret to it.
Yeah.
If you want to hurt somebody. If it's just total fucking nonsense, you're just like, okay. Then it's fun to like screenshot it and post it around your friends and be like, can you believe this fucking guy thinks I don't like weed?
Subscribe to Red Cow Entertainment on Patreon for full episodes every other week.